Now, in West Africa, residents in Burkina Faso are mourning after 14 people were killed and 19 wounded when a bus carrying students ran over an improvised explosive device on Saturday in northern Burkina Faso, according to government officials. The incident occurred in Sourou province near Burkina's border with Mali, where Islamist groups with links to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have increased attacks over the past 2 years, despite international efforts to eliminate them. Multiple sources say the convoy had been ferrying students back from an end-of-year school break. 7 students are among the dead, according to a government statement. It is not clear who was responsible for the blast, which hit one bus in a convoy of 3 that was carrying 160 passengers in total. A human rights report released Monday details atrocities committed in Burkina Faso by armed Islamists linked to both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The report is based on interviews with over 50 victims and witnesses interviewed during field research in Burkina Faso in November and December 2019. For more on this report, I'm joined by Corinne Dufka, the Human Rights Watch West Africa Director. Corinne, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
So what have you learned from this research? Why is there a surge in this kind of attacks in Burkina Faso?
Well, indeed, there's been a surge in violence by all sides over the last year. Over the last year, we've documented hundreds of people killed. First, you have many bold attacks against the militaries in the Sahel region, as well as hundreds of people killed, particularly in Mali, by ethnically allied militia groups. And in Burkina Faso, these groups have migrated south into Burkina. Burkina is a key country because it is the bridge state, the linchpin state between Islamist activities in the north, in the Sahel, and then the rest of sub-Saharan Africa.
Do we know who they are targeting? Do they have a specific target? Because we've seen this going on and on, as we just read in the news that happened on Saturday,
Yeah.
you know, on the bus that was attacked with the students in there dead. Do we know what is really behind this and who are they targeting?
Well, the victims that we have documented are largely from agrarian communities. There's an ethnic dynamic that's very worrying throughout the Sahel and in Burkina Faso. The Islamists have targeted their recruitment at the Fulani or Pul population. And the attacks, the victims of the vast majority of attacks that we documented are on the other side, are from ethnic groups, agriculturalist ethnic groups. And we've really noticed a change in the dynamic from 2016-17, where the Islamists largely attacked representatives of the state with the goal of them leaving. But now they're engaging in indiscriminate and sometimes targeted attacks against entire villages. We documented terrible attacks in which they surrounded marketplaces and churches and mosques and massacred people, as well as attacks on convoys like the one in November that targeted, that killed over 38 people working for a West African or a Canadian mining company.
You mentioned this is, you know, the whole of Sahel region is under these Islamist, attacks. Do we know if there are regional coordinated efforts from the leaders there, from the governments there, to tackle these elements?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the dynamic of targeting civilians we see in North and Mali as well, and in Nigeria as well. So we have called on these groups to make a distinction between an armed actor with a gun and civilians who are just going about their daily lives.
And how is the international community responding to this?
Well, the Sahel is getting higher up on the international agenda, particularly because of this severe deterioration in security and the increasing numbers of civilians being killed in all 3 countries.
So from a human rights perspective, what needs to be done to quell this kind of insurgency in the area?
First of all, we call on the government to do more to protect the civilian population. We call on the government to abide by international humanitarian law in their counterterrorism response, because they have engaged in, they have adopted an aggressive counterterrorism response, which is pushing a lot of people into the hands of the jihadists. And then, of course, we call on the jihadists to make a distinction between civilian targets and military targets.
Wow, Corinne, it's interesting to see that this has continued unabated, and especially in Burkina Faso. And we hope that there will be a serious response from the international community to help quell this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, I have more time for you. So
Okay,
what does human rights recommend then after doing this report? And maybe you can touch a little bit on what you heard from the witnesses. What was touching most?
Oh yeah, I mean they really provided absolutely devastating responses. I spoke with the faithful, both Christian and Muslims. They described how the Islamists, typically arriving on dozens of motorcycles, surrounded the church at one point, surrounding a mosque, and then targeted people, forced them to lay down, and then executed them point blank after executing the priest. We documented a terrible case of an attack on a humanitarian convoy in which motorized tricycles were bringing humanitarian aid to a displaced area, displaced camp, and they were intercepted, again, forced to lay down and then executed point blank, as well as cases in which, for example, even the 24th of December on Christmas Eve, where Islamists attacked the town of Arbinda. They attacked the gendarmerie, and then they went into a neighborhood in which there were thousands of displaced and just opened fire, killing over 30 women.
Thank you, Corinne. I imagine the impact is huge. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right. Corinne Dufka is the Human Rights Watch West Africa Director.